what you guys talked about at the bank?
So I'd make a new one. This is what you meant about mapping and interpretation. It's probably going to be just about a carbon copy of what John just talked to you about. But I'm going to mention a few problems that I had in mapping and interpretation. I've only been doing this for 7 years now, but the club that time out. I want to say one thing before I get started. I'd like to thank the lunker hunters for putting on this event every year. It's really nice that you do this for all the clubs in the area. We can finally get together and fish some of the Great Lakes that you've got around here. I appreciate it.
Ted, does this mean that we're going to make spoon pluggers out of all these lunker hunters?
Mapping and interpretation. The first thing I want to talk about is spoon plugging and what is it. Probably if I went around here I'd get about 30 different answers on what spoon plugging is. For some of us it's a religion, and this is our Bible. But I think what yeah, can I get an amen? But what I think spoon plugging really is, and this is not in the book, this is my own interpretation of what spoon plugging is, it's a percentage game. It's a method that increases your percentage of catching a fish. If you were to walk into the Soaring Eagle casino down the street here, and with $1,000 in your pocket, gonna gamble all day, you know that the odds are stacked against you walking out with $1,000 in your pocket. That's just the way it is. That's the way the odds are. Buck Perry tells us that fishing is normally bad, and then it gets worse. So it's a little bit of a gamble, just like that. But if you walked into that casino and didn't know anything about blackjack and sat down at the blackjack table, your odds would be infinitely worse of you leaving the premises with your $1,000. You would have to rely completely on luck. And in fishing, we don't want to have to rely completely on luck. So we need to have the knowledge that it takes to increase our percentages of catching fish. And I think that's what spoon plugging really does. It's a method of learning what we need to know, and then following through with the guidelines, sticking to the guidelines. And if we stick to those, we're going to increase our percentages. On to mapping and interpretation. Mr. Perry says, and I quote, "If I were to place the importance of knowledge on any given area, the highest degree of importance would probably have to be placed on your ability to interpret bottom conditions." I read this about 10 times before I put it down here. And there's one word in there that really bugged me. I couldn't figure out why he put that word in there, and that's this word right here, probably. If you know Mr. Perry, he doesn't mince words about many things. It's pretty black or white. And I think that the reason that he put probably in there is because if you're missing some of the spoon plugging guidelines, if you don't know the presentation of lures, if you're a little weak on knowing structure breaks and break lines, or weather and water conditions, it's not going to matter how good you interpret that structure situation, because you're not going to catch fish if you're not keeping your lures in position. So I think that's the reason why he put probably in there. But I think we'd all agree that mapping and the interpretation of what we map is pretty important. There's a few things that we can do before our actual on the water, and that is these. Watercolor. John Bales has beat that to death in the past, and I hope everybody's convinced now that watercolor does make a difference in your fishing success. I think most of us have proven that we have a higher percentage of success when we're fishing the darker colored waters. Available structure, that's something we don't have to worry about in this area too much. We've got tons of structure around here. If we had nothing to fish but highland reservoirs, we might have a problem with finding structure. But we're fortunate to live in an area where we've got plenty of structure. The third item is can this be fished properly? And we do have some problems with that around here. One thing being loss condition. John?
You got number 4.
Population.
Number.
That's not in the book. This is some of the things that you need to do your mapping. And most of them are pretty self-explanatory. You need a boat and a motor. You need trolling equipment and lures. You need floating markers. You need pencil and paper. Those are your needs. Contour maps and depth sounders are aids. How many of you rely on a great degree to your depth sounder to do your mapping?
How many of us have 8?
I hope nobody. I think we realized why contour maps would just be an aid in your mapping. Because most of the time, they're not real accurate. Especially on some fine details. They'll give you the ability to look at certain areas of the lake that may be productive, but when it comes down to the actual mapping, you need to go there and you need to actually do it. You need to get the lures in the water and find it. The depth sounder can be an aid. It's going to give you the correct depths so that you can do a better job of interpretation. But you'd be surprised at the interpretation that you can do with these lures. That's going to tell you what's really down there. This is a bar. How do we find this bar? We've got to run the first 3 sizes of lures in order to find the what and the where. By running these lures, 500, 400, and 250, you know that you've got something there to work with. That's the beginning of your interpretation. You know that you've got something that's coming out there, and you want to see what you got. The things that you're going to need to really do a thorough job on this are some floating markers, and you're going to need to be able to learn to use rifle sights. One of the biggest problems that I had when I started mapping was using rifle sights. I knew how to do it, but I didn't do it. And consequently, I was lost a lot. So it's something that you need, if you're not doing it, if you're not getting those rifle sights when you're trying to map this, and I assume that all of you are doing the first 3 sizes of lures, because if you're not, I'm going to have you troll with John, and you'll come back with welts all over you. So once you find this, we're going to need to put out some floating markers, and I think John made it pretty emphatic that you need to be able to use these. You can see that the ones I got are the high dollar type. You can use almost anything, but this is what I use, just because they're fairly inexpensive. You go down to the local recycling center and get a 2-year supply in about 5 minutes. They've got some nice features. The only thing about this is, if you use them with Mike's dog, it ends up with holes in them.
That's funny. We're out there today. Bring it in. Rolls the cap off, dumps out the water. Mike dog.
These got a really neat feature in them too. John said you want to put that marker at 8 to 10 feet. Get about 8 to 10 feet out there. You ever been fishing in about a 30-knot wind and have your marker all unravel? You don't have to worry about it anymore. It's already about 8 to 10 feet. A friend of mine showed me that trick.
We got a new kind too. I figured out that really works good. You buy one of those swim tubes, put a piece of pipe or a heavy bolt in the end of it, and they'll stand up in the water. And you can use a heavy weight on them. But what is really neat, you wonder where you get these flags? Listen, you call 1-800-MISS-DIG, and they come out of your home and they deliver them. They poke them all over to your lawn, and they're free.
So another good tip.
Why bother calling? Go get them out of your neighbor's yard.
Anyway, after we've laid this out, after you've run your 250 and you know what you got and where you got it, you know where it lies, you need to throw out some markers. A lot of guys don't know how many markers to throw out. Some guys throw out one, some guys throw out 20. Basically, it boils down to whatever outlines it for you. It's so that you don't get lost. You don't have to worry about what somebody else thinks about it. Probably on a bar like that, we're obviously going to put one on the tip, probably one on this finger, and maybe one on the other side so that we can start making some straight line passes on this. Something that I found very difficult to do originally, as I said, was to get rifle sights so that I can make straight line passes on this. Something that might help is to get yourself in the habit of it is whenever you're walking somewhere or something like that, just practice getting rifle sights. If you don't know what to look for, so that you get in the habit when you're making these passes, that you are looking up on the shore. Now that you've got this laid out, you can get your head out of the depth meter. In fact, you can turn it off. Try it. It's difficult to do. You go through withdrawal symptoms for about 10 minutes. I'm not kidding you. You'll be looking at it all the time. But you can do it. And what that does is it brings back your sense of feel. You'll start to feel what's down here. You'll start to feel what's going on. You need to tell the difference between rock and sand and gravel and those types of things. It'll tell you whether you can fish it properly. And that's where you can start your interpretation. Where does the interpretation start on something like this? Where does it begin? It begins out here in the deep water. That's where your interpretation begins. You need to know where that deep water lies on this. If this is the deep water out here, this nice little finger that you thought was so great may not be very productive. Then again, it might be. You have to check it out. Before you leave, you need to get those rifle sights so that you can come back there and check this. Just like John said, you may set out here and do this and get this all mapped out and find out that you're not catching any fish. Don't write it off as being not productive. If your sense tells you that this is a good piece of structure, you need to come back to that again and again until you've proven to yourself whether it is or it isn't. One of the best times to do mapping is on a bright, sunshiny day when you're by yourself. You're not going to be too worried about catching fish. You can spend some time, you can spend a couple hours on something like this. You're probably not going to want to do it at an outing like this where you're taking somebody out and you want to catch fish. You don't want to spend a couple hours out there going over something that you might think is boring. And again, your partner might just like that. But your interpretation is going to start there in deep water. You need to know where the deep water is and where it relates to this piece of structure. And then you can start making your straight line passes across that and see what you got all the way down. Something that helped me, and I just discovered this last fall, is I got where I was pretty good at lining up these rifle sights so that I could make straight line passes deeper and deeper off of here. Where I really had trouble was out here making straight line passes this way, especially if this bar was one of these instead of one of these. A real flat bar where you had to go way out off the end of this. A lot of reservoirs will have those type of bars, long slightly sloping bars. What I found myself doing is wasting a lot of time out here making the same pass. In the same pass because I didn't have a good reference point. It's the reason you need to have at least one marker with about 25 or 30 feet of line on it. Throw another one out here so that you got another reference point that you can go on from. It'll help you to get deeper and deeper without spending time making that same pass. It'll also give you a little bit more of a reference when you start making these passes down the side. Record what you find. Not many of us do this, but I can tell you that as beginning spoon pluggers, it's an absolute must that you do this. Every fish that you catch, you better know why you caught him and why you caught him where you did. If you can't answer that question, you need to do some work. And so, you don't need to do it while you're out right out there, unless you're like me and you can't remember things 5 minutes later. Do it when you get home. Draw it out. And then revisit that lake and see how close you actually come to drawing what you saw. You'll find that as time goes on, you'll get better and better. This is something that you can't ever get, better at. Each time you go out, you're going to find something that you didn't see before. I don't care if you fished that same structure 20 times. You're going to find things there that you really didn't think was there. And some of those structures will change. Very rarely, but they will change some.
I had a brain surgeon. I had part of my brain removed, and every time I go to a lake that I fished before, it's just like going to a brand new lake, and it's really exciting.
So don't be afraid to have part of your brain removed. Final interpretation. What's the final interpretation? Catch fish. The fish will tell you when you got it right. If you did everything correctly, they're going to tell you if you did it right or not. Mapping and interpretation. This is the teacher that you can always take with you. Anywhere you go, to any body of water. These are things that you'll never get too good at, but it's procedures that you can master. And I've been fortunate to be in a club that we have some of the best in the country, and so I've been able to learn a lot from them. And I can't stress enough to you guys that are new of going to these different outings. Which brings me to my final comment. We have an outing coming up, the Northern Indianna Spoonpluggers, August 10th through the 13th, and we'd like to have all of you come and see us. John's going to fix breakfast for everybody every morning. Denny's going to fix supper for everybody every night.
Biggest muskies in Indiana.
Oh yeah.
10 miles from 8 miles from the campground.
Denny, how come the guys from Michigan had to go down there and show you where those humps were?